Dear professors, dear participants, distinguished guests, good morning to everyone. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to the International Conference on Nation, State and Sovereignty, organized within the framework of the 2022 Central European Professors Network. The conference is co-organized by the Central European Association for Comparative Law, the Hungarian Association for Comparative Law, the Slovak Association for Comparative Law, the Polish Scientific Association for Comparative Law, the Association for the Advancement of Comparative Law Research in Serbia, the Romanian Association for Comparative Law, the Ferenc Mádl Institute of Comparative Law in Budapest, and the University of Miskolc Central European Academy. It is a great honor for me to welcome you all to this conference, also on behalf of Professor Timea Bárzo, the director of the Central European Academy, and Professor Ede János Szilágyi, the director of the Ferenc Mádl Institute of Comparative Law. Due to personal reasons, they were not able to attend this conference. So we would like to apologize, but I bring you their best wishes and their greetings. At our today's conference, we will deal with constitutional law of several countries in our wider region, with a focus on the protection of state and national symbols. As we are going to see today, this topic also touches upon such important issues as the sovereignty, the constitutional identity, or the protection of national minorities. I hope you will enjoy the lectures and your stay in Budapest. So let me introduce to you our first speaker, Professor Grzegorz Pastuszko, from the Faculty of Law of the University of Rzeszów in Poland. Professor Pastuszko is an expert in constitutional and parliamentary law. He will give us an introduction to the book written by the members of the Professors Network Research Group. The title of the book is Constitutional and Legal Protection of State and National Symbols in Central Europe. Unfortunately, Professor Pastuszko could not join us in person for this conference, but he has made a video recording which we are going to share with you now.
Ladies and gentlemen, first I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to today's conference. It's a great honor for me. My only regret, however, is that I cannot attend this meeting in person, although the primary plans were different. A random situation made that I could not come to Budapest. I'm really sorry for that. Well, the organizers of the conference asked me to say a few words about the monograph prepared under the scientific supervision of Professor Zoltán Tóth. The monograph entitled Constitutional and Legal Protection of State and National Symbols in Central Europe. This book consists of 8 chapters in total. The first chapter, written by the above-mentioned editor, the protection of state and national symbols across Europe, an overview of constitutional law and criminal law regulations, is a comparative legal reflection on the problem of solutions which protect national and state symbols in Europe, but also partly in the world. The rest of the chapters, on the other hand, are devoted to the solutions that are in force in individual, particular selected countries of the Central Europe. To be exact, these are the chapters written by Dalibor Cepulo, Constitutional and Legal Protection of State Symbols, the National Symbols and Symbols of National Minorities and Religious Communities in Croatia, Katerina Furmanova, Frumanova, protection of state, national and community symbols in the Czech Republic, Peter Kruzlic, Norbert Trible, national, state and community symbols in Hungary, Alexandra Syriv, protection of state, national and community symbols in Poland, Dalibor Dukic, problem of state, national and community symbols in Serbia, Jan Skroba, constitutional and legal protection of state, national and community symbols in the Slovak Republic, Benjamin Flander, constitutional and legal protection of state, national and community symbols in Slovenia. Well, first I'd like to congratulate the initiative related to the preparation of this monograph. The congratulations go directly to the University of Miskolc, the Central Academy, European Academy, as well as to the authors, to the member of the international research team headed by the Professor Zoltán Tóth. It is undoubtedly a valuable scientific project which takes up an interesting research problem and at the same time which fills the existing gap on the publishing market. So far, there's been no publication that comprehensively discusses the issue of legal protection of state and national symbols in Central Europe. Therefore, we are certainly dealing here with an innovative study which allows the reader to become acquainted with issues that have not yet been put into scientific analysis, into in-depth scientific analysis. It should be stated that a reviewed book is a part of a broadly understood trend of research on the phenomenon of the European states. And this is a good reason to appreciate the effort made for its preparation, as we know that such studies are rather rare in the scientific debate. I personally have no doubts that the Central European Academy needs this kind of research. After all, its results let strengthen awareness and knowledge about the countries of the region, and as a result they affects the possibility of deepening the ties of cooperation and building a common future. Thanks to it, it becomes possible to get to know each other's countries, states which are, as it's commonly known, as we all know, which are a cultural code of Europe and a political core as well. If we want to know something about our region, we must study the phenomenon of statehood in its various manifestations, in its various aspects. Only this way leads us to understand what Central Europe is. And I'm saying this as a man who in the past headed a quite similar research project which dealt with the issue of constitutional identity. The result of this project was a monograph entitled Constitutional Identity and EU Axiology Perspective of Central European States. So, well, I can say I know what I'm talking about. The great value of the monograph is that it focuses on solutions which protect the functioning of social and national communities and therefore which secure the needs of human being participation in social and national life. This is something that distinguishes this publication from most publications that appear in contemporary Europe and America, where the studies are concentrated on legal regulations concerning the rights of an individual related to the sphere of private life. and thus strictly relevant to individualism. As for the content, as for the issues covered in the book, I think we all agree with the opinion that the national and state symbols play an important role in the functioning of nation-states. Contrary to appearances, these symbols do not only have an informative value, so they're not only an element of state and national, or they're not only, well, a brand of a given country, I mean, a brand in the perception of the outside world, but they are an extremely important thing, an extremely important element of state and national identity of people living in Europe. Their existence, I mean, the existence of these symbols is most closely related to social and state axiology and is at the same time the result of historical evolution. They should be then perceived as a state building factor, a factor which creates a bond between citizens and state. This is why I share the view of the editor of the book, Professor Todt, who writes, and let me quote a short passage here. This reveals that a symbol is more than a simple signal for communicating information. A symbol is a sign depicting or expressing some sort of moral substrate, and at the same time it compels us to establish a certain approach toward itself, to identify with it or honor it, or on contrary, to resist or disavow it. If a sign refers to individual or group identity, this is the case with state and national symbols, then in a semiological sense it is an insignia. What is next? It must be said that national and state symbols are particularly important in countries that, in the countries of Central Europe, which found themselves in the Soviet sphere of influence after the Second World War and experienced communism imposed by Soviet Russia. The way, the pietism with which these symbols are treated, the key role which they play and which legislators are aware of, brings a clear message about cutting off from the gloomy past, from the bad past, and reveals attachment to independence, to values like independence, sovereignty, self-reliance. Symbols are of great importance when it comes to evaluating history. There's no need to convince about that anybody from Hungary, from my own country, or from any other countries, anyone living in any other countries in Central Europe. This awareness is something that we can observe in the individual chapters of the book. The authors focus only on, the awareness of historical roots. The authors focus only on legal solutions which regulate the protection of national and state symbol, but also explain the historical origin and evolution of these symbols. Perhaps it is best seen on the example of Hungarian legislation, which protects symbols relating to the very beginnings of the Hungarian states, and which shows the ancient and continuous existence of Hungary. As one of the authors of the book notes, such regulations make it sure, in a certain way, that Hungarian constitutionalism do not exist only from the period of modern constitutional states. This is a symbolic declaration of the of the 1,000-year-old Hungarian state in the Hungarian constitutional narrative. And I consider such an approach to be fully justified because thanks to it, a reader can understand why the legislators of the analyzed countries attach so much importance, pay so much attention to this issue, bringing it up, elevating it to the constitutional level, to the constitutional rank in all cases. And I'm convinced that without this historical background, without this historical part, the book would be much poorer in terms of content. Perhaps it would even lose its sense. But of course, the most important part of the book is the part in which the authors analyze the legal regulations protecting national and state symbols. I read all the chapters in separate, and I must say that the analyses contained in these chapters are of high substantive level and deserve a high rating. I have no doubt that the authors have fulfilled their duties well. It is noteworthy that each of them, each of the authors, adopted an original concept of the structure of the text. What we can see is that the editor, apart from suggesting the topic, did not impose any scheme of elements that should be included in particular studies. I believe that it was a good decision, a rigid formula, the formula which would require the analysis to get focused, to be focused on predetermined issues, could make some authors feel uncomfortable, preventing or making impossible to make a comprehensive approach to the issue that they worked on. With such a great diversity of traditions, paths of historical development of individual states, different legislations, any concept imposed in advance, any concept concerning the structure, would be unjustified in my opinion. Therefore, all I can say in this regard, good job. From the book, we learn that the scope of protection in particular countries is not uniform, and the solutions which regulate this issue, they regulate this in different ways. For example, the difference is that in Czech Republic, the legislator does not protect the native language. However, a few attempts have been made in the past, but with no good result. Attempts to change the situation. In Poland, the legislator does not protect the anthem. And in Hungary, we have regulations with regard to the protection of national and state symbols in business, which is kind of original. The difference also is that in some countries, much attention is paid to the issue of protection of symbols of religious and ethnic communities. Like, for example, Croatia, Czech Republic, Slovenia. The book also shows that there are common and universal elements resulting from a common belief of legislators that some issues require protection. It is conspicuous, for example, that in fact everywhere the protection of symbols within a certain scope, has a constitutional dimension. I mean, that there are provisions which refer to this issue, as well as administrative, criminal, and private law dimension. Finally, in the book we find an information that in some countries there are regulations which refer to national and state symbols, and which found application, which were applied in judicial practice. Comments of this type were especially exposed by Professor Aleksandra Sywit, who wrote about the case of Poland, who wrote the article about the case of Poland, and Professor Benjamin Flante, who referred or who wrote in turn the chapter in the case of Slovenia. These comments clearly show that the analyzed provisions are not a dead law, if I may put it in this way. I mean, that they are not out of use, but the opposite. They give rise to disputable and sometimes very, very controversial situations which can protect the rights in social and national communities, but also the rights of individuals in a real way. Well, getting to an end, I'd like to, let me do this one more time, congratulate all people who were engaged in preparing this monograph. I can definitely say that the monograph is excellent. Well, I had lots of pleasure when reading this. This was due to the fact that the monograph was prepared at a high linguistic level, and its authors took care of the quality of the analyses which were carried out. The fact is that I could learn from this book about things I had not known before, and at the same time I realized how many similarities and how many differences there are in the legal solutions which refer to state and national symbols in the selected countries. I'm deeply convinced that this book, as an original and innovative study, will become an important voice in the academic world and will be widely quoted in other scientific studies. It will certainly also contribute to the deepening of research on the title issues, inspiring scientists from various European research centers to make efforts in this area. And finally, it will be helpful for all people dealing with the subject of state and national symbols, especially journalists, politicians, and so on. All this shows that the monograph has got a great value. And thank you very much for your attention.